In this video, we're going to cover how to use the retro office assets. This way you get to start creating with them as quickly as possible. So once you have the retro office as part of your project, inside this folder, WOLD_retro office, you'll find additional folders. The very first thing is inside the maps folder. In here, you'll find all the asset props in one map. So if you open this up, you'll see all the assets in one map. All of the 27 modular pieces and the 52 props. And it'll just give you an overview of everything included in one map. Then I also provided two different maps for different lighting scenarios. These are complete environments that you can just explore and see what is possible and how all the assets are used together. You'll have the exterior lighting. This is where you'll have external light, the directional light coming in, and this is a daytime environment. Of course, there are parts of this environment that are completely hidden away from the natural light, from the directional light. So you have both interior lighting as well as exterior lighting coming from outside lighting the interior. And then you have nighttime environment where it's not sunlight, but it's moonlight. So you have two different lighting scenarios you can take a look at and explore both of these maps. Inside the blueprint folder, you'll find one blueprint for computer cables, and I'll cover how to use this a little later. Inside the sounds folder, you'll find 4 different sounds. You have wave files, and then you have 4 sound cue files. And the sound cue files include background noise for room tone, as well as sound effect for a vending machine. And you would actually use the sound cue files inside your map by left clicking and dragging them, and then controlling the properties inside the details panel for them. And each of these sound cue files use the sound wave files as part of it. So use the sound cue files inside your map, not the sound wave files. And now let's take a look at the static meshes. I'm going to quickly open up a basic map. And first we're going to cover and just take a look at the modular pieces. So there are 27 static meshes for modular environment creation. You have walls, you have doors, doorways, stairs, and so on. And all of these can be snapped together to create a larger environment, just like you saw in the example maps. It is best to create by dragging any of these meshes into your environment and use the 10 unit grid snapping system. So I'm going to drag one of these walls. So let's drag the 300 wall. And the way these walls are created, you have multiple pieces. You have a 300 width wall as well as height, as well as a smaller half size 150. And as long as you stick to the 10 unit grid system, it's going to be easier for you to snap them together and create a larger environment. If you go down lower to 5 units, then you might have a little bit of inconsistencies in terms of snapping these pieces together. It's going to be harder for you to snap them together. So I recommend that you stick to the 10 unit grid system, so it's easier for you to snap them together and create and use these modular pieces. Now, the way most of these meshes were created, there's a little bit of extra geometry that I inserted, and this was deliberate. First of all, it gives you a little bit of extra detail on the corner, but then it also allows you to create nice corners by rotating one of these walls and not have a gap in between. So whenever you are creating two pieces together, such as let's duplicate this wall, and whenever you're snapping them together, it allows you to have a little extra geometry in between, as well as still staying on the grid. However, you will find the little extra piece of geometry, it's not going to create any problems, but you can see that little piece of geometry right there is actually overlapping into the wall, and that's how it's supposed to be. So again, as long as you stick to the 10 unit grid system, everything will be just fine. But what it allows you to do is have a little extra geometry whenever you're placing two walls together like this. You have nice little detail on the corner, and everything lays lined up properly. And with the floor and the ceiling and everything else will be perfectly together for you to create a more modular environment a lot easier. So this way you can have detail either this way with the wall, or you can even push it into the wall itself like so, and you have a different corner. So that little piece of geometry that I created it's not going to overlap over the wall. Like you can see right there, it's actually inside the wall. So these two walls are overlapping, and you're never going to see this top, but it allows you to have different corners, thus different detail. So a little breakdown on the best way to use these modular pieces is create the floor first, and then align the walls next to it. So let me drag a floor piece. That's 300. So position it down here on the bottom. And then once you have the floor, then you can go ahead and start aligning because the floor and the wall and the ceiling are all 300 units in width. So that way I align them first before you begin to duplicate the rest of the pieces. So let me duplicate this on the other side. You can have the wall either be on the corner. Let me remove this floor. So you can have it right there on the corner, or you can overlap it on top of the wall. On top of the floor, like so. It's up to you. And then let's drag a ceiling. So you create one kind of a complete unit for the hallway, for example, and then you can take all these pieces and duplicate them for the rest. So I would drag this up. So now we have one unit right here. Then I would select them all, hold Alt, and just drag them to duplicate. Make sure they are aligned and there's no space. And again, as long as you stick to the 10 unit grid system, that'll start snapping together and there's no gaps. And you can just go ahead and start duplicating for more and more. For the corner pieces right here, how you would want to kind of have that detailed corners, again, also up to you. For easier way to create, simply take this floor and just duplicate it, and then take this wall, and instead of position it on top of the floor, like I said, you can have that little extra detail like so, or you can just push it so it is right on the corner like the rest of the wall and the floor pieces. And then just take this and duplicate it for the other side. And duplicate it again. Then take this, duplicate it on the top. And then duplicate it for the rest of the hallway. You can see how quickly you can just start creating without any gaps, without any problems. And especially the corners, they all line up and you get the full width of the hallways without having to overlap certain walls on top of the floor and kind of having to block it off with pillars or columns on the corners, like a lot of the modular pieces. Now, there are also, in addition to creating flat surfaces like this, you have pillars or columns you can insert. So you have 300 height columns as well as 150. So you could take, let's take this square column instead of a rounded one. I'm just going to drag it into the level right here. And you have an option. You can use these pillars or these columns and just overlap it over existing geometry like so. And either, maybe position it in the center if you want to have that detail, or maybe just cover it up and then just duplicate it for the rest of the hallway for the corridor. Or you do have an option of, let me just maybe move it over here, to kind of place it right there so you have a little bit of detail on the corner, and then take this wall and duplicate it and then align it to the other side. And you can have it this way. So this way it allows you to have that little extra corner detail. The only downside for this example, it's not really a downside, but it's a workaround. Whenever you are duplicating the floor pieces, eventually, they're not going to line up. So you would just continue, duplicating this until you have a corner. So maybe some of these pieces will eventually, they will be outside of your floor. So for example, if I wanted to turn the corner here, I could just take this and rotate it, position it right down in the corner, and this piece will just stick out. But again, it's not a big deal. A player will never see it, but it all depends on how you would want to create the hallway. But you can use one method or the other. Now, like I said, you have 300 width pieces for walls, and you have variety of walls as well as 150. So this gives you a lot of variety in terms of the type of architecture you can create in terms of different type of hallways with different type of detail for the walls. Same for the walls. Would I have a window? You have a 150, you have a 300, and they're easily swappable. If you, let's say you create, take this piece, so I'm gonna just duplicate it and just snap it together. One of the easiest way to swap these pieces to another modular asset without having to re-drag it into your level is just simply select it and swap it out for something else. So if I want to place, let's say, a window here, I would just select that piece, and inside the details panel, I can just left click, hold and drag and replace the static mesh. And it'll just swap it out without you having to move it or having to re-drag this and line it up. And if I want, let's say, a doorway, I can just select a cased opening or a doorway and just swap it out. So this is going to be a much quicker way for you to create modular environment by simply first just duplicating a bunch of walls, and then you can swap them out using this method. And of course, the best way to kind of get familiar with these modular assets is just to do a quick test environment. Just drag as many of these inside the map and see what you can come up with on your own. Just a simple room with a bunch of walls, bunch of doorways, put the floor in, put the ceiling in. And of course, I recommend that you take a look at one of these example maps and how they were used together. Next, let me briefly cover the usage of glass. So the only static mesh that contains glass as part of the mesh itself is a door B. Once you drag that in, the glass piece is actually part of the door, so that way you don't have to worry about it. Once you kind of take the door, you can rotate it, the glass is going to be right there. But for the windows, they do not have glass as part of it, and that includes for all the window that has a window opening, and you have to place the glass into it. And I wanted to leave that out, so that way you can either have a static mesh with a completely opened walkable space through it, no glass, or if you want to have glass, you just have to position the glass into it. So there are two different pieces of glass 150 and glass 300. So you just drag one of these into the level, and then you would have to position it in between. And again, as long as you stick to the 10 unit grid system, it will be positioned in there. You just have to make sure that you align it, and it'll be positioned right in between the frame, that little metal frame right there. And once you position it once, all you could do, you just leave it, and you just have to make sure you select it. But let me position it a little bit cleaner. It's right there. And so you don't have to constantly reposition it. You just select the glass and then select the static mesh window opening, and then you can group it. Control G, or right click with those two static meshes selected and then just group. And now they will be selected together, and then you can just, you don't have to reselect the glass. You just select one, both will be selected once you group it, and then you just quickly duplicate it, and then you'll have the glass. If you cannot select the glass by itself, or let's say you drag it into the level, and then you deselect it, and then you try to select it again, and it's just you are unable to select it, and you just select it and it's not selecting it. Come over here to settings and allow translucent selection right here. Shortcut key is T. Make sure that's enabled, and that way you can select the glass. And for, let's say for the smaller windows, that's 150 for the wall, or with the window 150. Just drag the glass 150 and do the same thing. Just position it, make sure it is placed in between, and then make sure it's aligned right in there, and then select them both. Control G to group, and now you have them together. And now you can go ahead and duplicate it, and then you'll have glass and window together as one. There are a couple of pieces of geometry that you may not be aware of how to use them, and it's the floor 20 under door and the ceiling 20 units. Two pieces of geometry. And these, for example, if you insert the doorway and you end up creating a floor piece, and then eventually, when you create an office area, you can either take the floor pieces for the 300 floor, and you can either use them to kind of overlap certain other pieces of geometry like so. Actually, this is a ceiling. Let me put a floor 300. So a lot of times when you create like an extra room, you may need to have the floor pieces, kind of create their own section and not overlap some other pieces of geometry for the walls. Now, when you have a doorway, the doorway doesn't have anything underneath. A workaround would be to actually take these and just move them underneath as you connect them with another piece of the floor. But a lot of times you may want to just create a section for the room, and it's just that there's no connection way. Like, you don't want to connect the floor pieces together underneath another wall or this doorway. So the floor 20 under door as well as the ceiling, they allow you to insert a small, to kind of cover up those gaps if you happen to have them. And I'll open up the map example in a second, but we just simply take this under door floor 20 unit piece and just kind of align it and position it underneath the doorway. So that way you have that piece of geometry, and you're not having to take a larger floor piece and having to slide it underneath a wall or in this case a doorway. And also in certain cases you may need to have the ceiling 20 unit piece for the top, and you just simply do the same thing. You may not need to use this one, but I did include it. There are certain examples of the environment that I kind of worked on and created. there are certain parts of the wall geometry that I needed to have this to kind of block off and have that 20 unit piece for the ceiling to cover out the gap. So let me open up this map really quick, one of these maps. So let's do the nighttime. And right here, you can see that I included the one underneath the door. So that way I can just create the interior of the office and not having to worry about, having to resize or just extend it further past the outside area. So for a lot of these, I do have that 20 unit piece. For this one, I do not, but in this example right here, as well as right here. A little later, I will cover the material instances that are being used for the floor in order to replace, so you don't have to have tile, you can have carpet, you can have wood floor. So I'll cover that a little later. One little thing about using these small pieces. Actually, let me open up the daytime map. I think that might be a little bit more apparent. Actually, they look pretty good here and here. But whenever you place a small section or even some other section of the floor pieces, the texture might not line up exactly. So let me show you what that actually means. So if you happen to have certain floor pieces and the way light hits them, they're not seamless. Now, I already fixed this one, but I'm going to show you how to fix it if you happen to have that problem. So you may encounter this with floor pieces that are full size. They're either 150 units or 300 units, like these right here, the bigger pieces. Or you may encounter the same thing with a smaller 20 unit whenever you cover up underneath a cased opening or a doorway. So sometimes what you may experience is, let me rotate this 90 degrees, and you kind of align it. And you can see that right here, they don't quite align in terms of the texture, in terms of the seamlessness, and the way the light hits them. So the way you fix this is you just simply need to take that piece of geometry and rotate it 90 degrees until you get the seamless transition of one texture to the other. And that's all you need to do, is just simply, once you position it and they don't have that seamlessness happening to them, just go ahead and take that piece of geometry, rotate it, reposition it back. If, like, you can see that it's completely discolored, just take it again and rotate it 90 degrees again, then move it up. And one of the rotations on certain sides will work. And sometimes you may need to flip it 180 in order to the other side, then just align it and make sure you're kind of position it. And just keep working it until the seamless texture is aligned. And in this case, this one worked. So that's a workaround on certain pieces of geometry if you happen to encounter that issue. And then you have a folder that contains props. And these are self-explanatory. There are details for your level to detail with, and you simply just left click, hold and drag any of these props into your level. The pivot point is assigned to the bottom, to where you would naturally need to have these assets placed on top of the floor without you having to, position them on top. So you just left click, hold and drag, and they'll be positioned on top of the floor how they're supposed to. There are two props here for plants, and I went ahead and I separated the pot and the plant as they're all individual props. So that way you could use one of the pots by themselves without the plant. But then you could also have, let's say, a duplicate of this and then place a plant on top. And you just have to align the plant pivot point so it's intersecting the ground with the pot. In some of these instances, for more smaller prop, you may need to lower the grid to 5. And you can use the bracket keys or left click and just lower it to 5 temporarily. Position whatever you need more detailed, more precise, and then just put this back up to 10. And again, make sure you stick to the 10 unit grid system whenever you're working with modular pieces. It'll make things a lot easier for you. Now inside the textures folder, of course, you'll find all the textures that are being used as part of the materials. And you don't really need to navigate into this folder at all, but the important part is inside the materials folder. And inside the materials folder, you'll find a set of master materials for glass, for modular pieces, for plants, for props, and then a bunch of material instances that are derived from one of these master materials. And many of these material instances contain properties for you to change and tweak the color, the saturation, and few other properties for many of these modular pieces and props. So let's cover a few of these now. Let me go ahead and open up the map with all the assets in it, it'll be easier to show you. So all of these assets right here, the modular pieces, as well as a few props, have material instances that can be swapped out for a different look and feel of your environment. So by default, you will have this material applied to most of the modular walls. And let me go ahead and select it and show you. So if I navigate to the details panel, under materials, it'll be material instance wall 1, woven wallpaper. You have 3 other wall material instances you can swap these out to. Carpeting, by left clicking, hold, and drag this material instance onto any wall, or a wooden paneling. So you can just take any of these wall materials and just swap it out to any of these 3 different looks that you would want. If you prefer something else as a default material, so right now this is the default one that's applied to all the static meshes. Let's say you want this wall to have a different material wall instance every time you drag it from the content browser. And right now it'll have this wall 1. So you would just double click to open up the static mesh editor inside the content browser for this specific static mesh. The static mesh editor would open up, and here you can replace to wall 2 or wall 3 as the default, and it will have that material instance applied to all of the static meshes that you drag from the content browser into the level. Or you could just swap it per instance within the map itself by left clicking, holding, and dragging that material instance onto the static mesh inside the level. Now you also have 5 different floor materials you could swap out to. So the default one is the tile, and I'm going to go into the content browser and search inside the materials folder for floor. So that way we can just narrow it down to the floor material instances. So you'll have the carpet. So you just, again, you left click, hold and drag and just swap it out to whatever material instance you want for that floor piece. Or again, you could swap it out inside the static mesh editor. So that static mesh will always have this material instance assigned every time you use the floor piece and drag it into the level. So let's just swap it out to all of them. You have another carpet, red carpet, then you have another carpet. So 3 different types of carpet, 2 different types of wood floors, and the tile, which is the default applied to all the meshes. And you could also do the same thing for the stairs. So if you wanted the stairs to have a different material instance instead of the tile, you could just swap that out by dragging it and replacing it. And again, these for the walls will also work not just for the walls, for the solid walls. Let me type in wall, but also will work on the windows as well as the doorways. So they're all interchangeable to something else. Now, when it comes to the walls, as well as for the floor, many of the properties inside the material instance are going to be the same. So let's cover the wall, because the wall has a couple of properties in addition to everything else. So let's say you want to have this material, but you want to maybe darken the color of it, maybe change the saturation, or maybe change the color to something else. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this wall material, which is again the default that's applied to all of them. So we get to see the result. I'm going to double click to open up the material instance. For all the material instances, you will have different parameters to control. You can control the tiling, to change the albedo, the metallic properties, the specular and roughness. I'm just going to cover the ones that you want to stick with and focus on. So the very first thing is probably going to be the albedo tint, which is the color of the albedo. So if you wanted to change this color to something else, just simply enable the albedo tint and then left click for the color picker. And here you can change the color to anything else. So let's say we want this red. Click OK, and now you've changed the color. However, you will find that once you start changing the color, this right here for this specific texture, it's also affecting metal. And I added a property that you could mask out and just retain the metal color without changing the color of it. And it's going to be found right here. Again, this only will apply for the walls. So all you could do is just enable this wall mask metal strip and then enable it, set it to true. So that way you'll retain the metallic color while changing the color of the walls. And also for the walls that have a metallic strip, you can change this metallic strip to a wooden strip. So sometimes you may not want to have a metal strip, but for variety, you may want to have a wooden strip instead for a more retro look. And I provided a property for you as well. If you scroll down inside the material instance for the walls, you have wooden trim right here. So you can just enable it and set it to true. And this will replace to a texture inside the textures folder, which you could actually replace if you wanted to. but it assigns a default texture that I set it up in the material, and now you have a wooden trim instead of a metal trim. So it just gives you a different look. Let me go ahead and just disable everything, just reset it back. So I'm going to disable the wooden trim. Then I'm going to come up here, change back the wall mask metal strip, and then reset this back to white. Now, if you're going to mess around with different material instances and changing the properties, what I recommend you do is make a copy of this. So leave the default one that's here, but duplicate so you have the one that you're going to change the properties to. And then you can always revert back to the original one. So select the one you want to duplicate, have a copy of, right click on it and choose duplicate. Rename it to something that you can recognize. Let's say we just want to change the color one, let's say, for example. And then you would need to apply this material instance onto the static meshes that you would want to have, the change be made on. So you just left click, hold and drag, apply it here. Or again, you can apply it at a static mesh editor level for all of the instances of this static mesh. So for now, I just applied it to the one inside the level. Then you would just double click on this one, and then you can change, the color to something else. Apply all the properties for it that you would want. And then now you have a different color applied for this material instance while retaining the original one on everything else. And that way you can always revert back. Let's say you want to go back to the original one, just come down to the material property inside the details panel for this selected mesh and just reset it back to default. And many of the same properties for color, for tint, for everything else can be changed for the floor as well. So if let me type in floor. And if you open up any of these properties, let's drag the wood, double click on this material instance, you have the same properties for the floor. So if you want to darken it, lighten it, change the color of the wooden floor, you can do so here. And again, I recommend that you make a copy of it, apply that copy to the static mesh, and then change the properties. You have also similar properties for the doors. So I'm going to search for door, and you have a material instance for door wood. So right now this is metal. So if you want to swap it out to a wooden door, just replace it with a material instance called wood door. And if you want to revert back, again, just clear it by redragging the metal instance door metal, or you can do so inside the material property in the details panel by resetting to default. And I also created a material instance for the color of the door. So basically this is a copy of the door metal, but this will allow you to change the color of the door without having you to worry about also changing the color for the lock and the metal trim here for where you see the window. So you simply just take this, drag it onto a door, open this up, metal color material instance, and then let me make this smaller. And then you can see that albedo tint is already enabled, so you can change the color for the door. And wall mask metal strip is already enabled, and this what allows you to retain the color for the handle. If you don't have it, it will also change the color, just like for the walls, but I already enabled this for you. So this will allow you to have different door colors for the metal, as well as changing it to wood. And of course, if you want to darken this wood or change the color of it, you can go into properties and control the albedo tint. You have albedo controls here for saturation, brightness, and contrast. And then you would just enable wall mask metal strip. So that way you're not changing the color for the handle. So that it retains its metal property. Next, let's cover some of the props and material instances associated with them. So you have vases and mugs, which you can change the color to, as well as the file cabinet. So for the vase, the default is going to be white. Same for the mug. They use the same texture, same material instance. So if you drag the cup or the vases, they will be white. However, you can change the color of them, and I already created an example of it. And there is a material instance that I created for you. So if you go to the materials for this vase, and you can actually, let's go to materials and type in vase. And you have right here, prop, vases, mugs, color, and the default one. So this one right here, if you open this up, you can change the color to anything you want. And this will apply to the vases, to the mugs, whichever material instance you have applied to that prop. And again, you can just go ahead and mess around with the properties, so what they do, as well as if you want to have variety of these colors, just make a duplicate of it. So that way you have a variety of colors for the vases if you want. And the same thing applies for the file cabinet. Sometimes you may want to have a different file cabinet with different color. So you have one that is the default and one that already has color material instance applied to it that I created for you. So let's take a look at this one. I'm going to select it and I'm just going to go to the materials and find it inside the content browser. So this one right here, this is the default on the right. This one right here already has the color changed. And you can see prop, file cabinet, color. And it's already applied to the static mesh. So if I open this up, all I have to do is go to albedo tint and change to any color I want. And I went ahead and created a mask that's already assigned and applied and enabled inside the material instance, so you don't have to worry about it. So it does not change the metal properties for the handle and the name tag. And you'll find it right here. Again, you don't have to worry about any of these. I already enabled them for you. So make sure you keep this material with its properties enabled. You just make a copy of it if you want to have a variety of file cabinet colors. But you can see here, it uses a mask, inverts the mask, uses a specific channel within the mask, and here's the mask enabled to control the texture and what is changing. Again, ignore these since I already enabled them for you, and you just change the color by using this material instance and just make a duplicate of it for any other color that you would want for the file cabinet. And last, we have lights. So there are different types of lights, such as wall and ceiling lights. They have emissive property turned on, and you can also have it turned off. In this example map, I kind of duplicated it and applied one to the other for off and for on. So let me go ahead and find this one right here. I'm just going to navigate to it. It has prop light on for this light. This is a ceiling light, or could be a wall light, as well as this one. And this one has prop file cabinet, lights, vents. This is the default. So if you drag this material instance, let me just find it inside the content browser. And I'm just going to drag it inside the level and just raise it up. So by default, the lights will have the light property off. If you want to have this light on, go to the materials and search for light and find prop lights on and just drag this onto that static mesh, and we'll have the light property enabled just like it did for this. So again, all lights will be turned off unless you drag a material instance with emissive property enabled onto that light, onto that static mesh. And the same thing for, there are two types of lamps. One that will have the light off. Let me find inside the content browser. So if you drag it, this light will be off, but you can turn that light bulb on by using a material instance called prop lights on, which is the same one for the lights, for the ceiling lights and the wall lights. So you just simply drag this onto that static mesh and the light bulb will be on for the desk lamp. Or you can have it off by using the default. And then for the monitor, you have monitor that can be off, which is what it is by default. But you can have screen that's turned on by using a material instance inside materials. And let me just find it quickly. It's going to be called prop PC emissive on. And you just simply, so let's say you drag the monitor and it's off and you want to have the screen to be turned on, just go to the materials and find this material instance, props PC emissive on, and drag it onto the monitor and it'll turn the screen on. And then you can also do that to the keyboard. The only thing for the keyboard, you can see the little lights right here. This is emissive off and this is emissive on. And once you drag the keyboard, you just, if you want to have those lights for a little extra detail to be on, just take the same material instance, emissive on PC, drag it onto the keyboard and it'll just turn the lights on. Or if you want to have them off, keep them at default. And the same thing, one last thing is you have lights that are on for the vending machine. It's kind of hard to tell because it is bright right now outside. You can kind of tell right here. Let me actually open up one of the example maps. Let's go to this map right here. And I'm simply navigating, I'm going to navigate to, let me go to a different one where it's a little darker. And here is the light on the vending machine that is on. Let me find this vending machine inside the content browser. So by default, when you drag it and rotate it so we can see it, it's going to be on. If you want to have this light off, go to the material instances, search for vending machine, and you can have prop vending machine off. And just simply drag this material instance onto the vending machine and it'll turn off the emissive property for the front of the vending machine. So you can have the light that is on and a light that is off. So you have quite a lot of variety with all these props for the walls, for the floor, as well as the props for the colors and the missing materials for some of these props to have those lights on, have those lights off. So that gives you a lot of variety in what you would want to create for specific parts of the environment. Again, I recommend that you experiment with these. Keep this video handy so you can come back to it and rewatch it if you need to. And of course, take a look at the example maps and see what's available, see what has been created with them by reverse engineering them. And the very last thing I want to show you are the cables. So for the monitor, for the telephone, for the desk lamp, you may want to have extra detail of cables, power cables, running from it, or just connecting the monitor to the case. And right here, in the example maps, I have a bunch of cables already connected together, and they look very nice. So there's some power cables running underneath the desk, as well as monitor and the tower are being connected together. So inside the blueprint folder, you will have one blueprint. If you drag this blueprint into your level, you will have a cable, and you can go ahead and duplicate and create additional spline points for this cable in order to extend and make that cable bend and position any way you want. So you have full control of how that cable is going to be run from any of the hardware, from any of the computers or telephone or desk lamp. So the very first thing I want to point out is there are two different types of cables. There is a thin cable and there is a thick cable. Once you insert a blueprint into the level inside the details panel, it already has a mesh assigned to it by default, which is a thin cable. And it is this cable right here, the thin one. But you can also have a thicker cable if you want, but you will have to replace that inside the details panel for this blueprint by going into the static meshes, into the props, and searching for cable. And you'll have right here, thick and thin. And you just simply take the thick cable and drag it into the new mesh property for the inserted blueprint and replace it. So now you can have a thick cable. So either thin or thick is going to be up to you. But this is how you replace it, thin to thick or back to default. So once you've placed the blueprint into your level and you've picked the cable that you would want to use, you can create additional spline points and make that cable thicker. So the way you do that is once you have the blueprint inside your level, make sure you are in the editor mode, and I was in game mode, so that way you get access to the spline point control and ability for you to select those spline points. So here's the blueprint, and you can see the little spline point right there. And the game mode that I was talking about is right here. When you press G, this will simply, it hides everything, all the editor icons, and you won't be able to see it. So make sure you are in editor mode, not game mode. And then this spline point right here, here's the beginning of the blueprint. And you need to select the spline point. And once you have that spline point selected, if you hold down Alt and left click and drag, this will create additional spline points. And then you can simply create as many spline points as you need in order for you to bend and twist and kind of control that cable and how it runs. If you simply left click, hold and drag without holding down Alt, this will just continue to duplicate the static mesh of this blueprint every 20 units. And if you drag it back, you can see that it's making it smaller. So it's programmed into the blueprint that anytime you just drag the spline point, it will continue to duplicate that static mesh that's part of the blueprint. However, if you want to reposition and bend the cable in different ways, you need to hold down Alt to create additional spline points so you can go ahead and start bending. There's going to be a problem at certain parts when you are creating spline points. It might start to bend your cable. So what you would need to do in this case, you can see that it's bending. You just simply select one of the spline points near it and just reposition it and redrag the cable so it's not overlapping and it's not twisting over each other. You may want to disable the grid snapping so it's a little easier for you to just manipulate. And I already inserted the two spline points right here, and you can just go ahead and now you can control how this cable is run. You can see that if I just drag this up, it'll just continue to duplicate, but sometimes you want to, again, have more spline points so you can just manipulate that curve with a lot more precision. So I'm going to hold down Alt and create a spline point. And you can see it created a spline point. Now I can go ahead and just reposition this a lot better. And twist and turn. I can even rotate. Then I can go ahead and create another spline point, hold down Alt. Then I create another spline point, hold it down Alt. And you can see that I'm now beginning to reposition and curve this cable any way I want. And this is how I created these cables right here, is by simply creating multiple spline points along the way. So I can bend and twist and position this cable any way I need, depending where it's coming out from and where it's going. At any point you mess up that blueprint, just go ahead and delete this blueprint from the level. Just redrag again, raise it up, and let's just stick with the thin one and do the same thing again. Select that first spline point and then hold down Alt. So you can go ahead and create spline points, or just drag it to make it longer. Then let's hold down Alt again. Let's hold down Alt again and just drag. So that way we're creating additional spline points and shaping that cable. And if you want to see the cable without the editor icons, press G for game mode. Now you can see it, what it's doing. Press G again, and then you can go back and modify. If you need to delete any spline points, you can just select it and hit delete. It'll reshape the cable, of course, but if you place too many spline points inside, you can just go ahead and remove them. And if you need additional spline points along the way, let's say I deleted this one and I wanted an extra one in here, just select any of the spline points in between, hold down Alt, and it'll duplicate and insert the spline point in between. And again, this is how I created all of these cables, just by simply running them through, having a beginning point, and just hiding them underneath the desk or inside the computers. So you have that extra detail that you can do for the phone, for the computers, as well as for the desk lamp. So with that, you have the breakdown of all the retro office assets, how to use them, all the different material instances, how to use the cables, and I can't wait to see what you create. Have fun and create great environments.